Hello, everybody. Whoa,
Welcome back to the Other Side Lifestyle Podcast with Jim and Aram. Stella!
What's up?
Stella! What movie is that from, Aram?
It's from a couple. Well, no, it's from Modern Family, actually.
Well, it's from Streetcar Named Desire.
There
Is
you
the
go.
movie.
Yeah.
I've only heard that
Stella!
once or twice in my entire existence.
Yeah.
But I love it.
Yeah, we got Mike Stella on. If you're watching this on YouTube, it's a real Jim in my background.
It
His
is a fake Jim.
His
This
is
is-
fake.
It is a real Jim. It's just a
does look good, though.
photoshopped background.
Yes, it does look good, though. But yeah,
Are you
Rob,
like-
why
are
don't you...
Are you in like a cave or something, Mike? Like, why don't you want to show us your real background?
I can show you my real back. I'm just in my house. I just thought this was maybe a more like,
That's
oh,
cooler.
cool. Like he's
That's
in the
cooler.
industry, but you know, behind me is really just my wife's laptop and computer. So that's like way less fun.
What do you guys go like back? You guys go like back to back when you work?
No, I very honestly rarely work from home. It's just today it happened to work out where it was quiet here, and right now at the facility I got all the high school athletes in there like banging weights around, and I was like, you know what, it might be a little quieter, better for concentration and recording purposes, so I'm doing it for you guys.
It's like
But I
when
also
we
live only 2 minutes from my facility, so I've uncovered the ultimate life hack, which is have your business very close to your house.
Oh, God,
So it allows me to, you know, be a little bit more limber, I guess.
Yeah.
Nice.
It's like when we had Jim Ferriss on and he's in
Yes.
Lifetime Fitness during the podcast. We're like just hearing the gym. He's just sitting in like the food section of the place.
Right.
And,
right.
We could like barely hear him, I felt like, throughout. But so thank you for going to a quiet. It's quiet.
Not a problem. My pleasure.
So, Mike, tell our audience who you are, what you do, and why anybody should care to listen to you.
Well, the first part's easy. The second part, I'm still kind of shocked that people want to listen to me, which is cool.
Same.
But my name is Mike Stella. I'm a certified athletic trainer by trade. So really, a lot of my career I spent on the sports medicine side, working for athlete teams. So I worked for the Florida Gators, George Washington University. I've done a lot of like Division I athletics.
Any cool places?
I worked for the
Just
Florida
kidding.
Gators.
I'm just
Yeah,
kidding.
I was actually part of that national championship run with the 08 Gators, like way back in the day. So I got to be on the sideline for that, which was like
That's
really,
cool.
really
Wait,
cool stuff.
was that the Tim Tebow era?
Oh yeah, Tim Tebow, the Aaron Hernandez era. It was very, very interesting. In fact, if you guys check out the Swamp Kings documentary on Netflix, you'll see a hairier, goatee-less version of me like walking around in the background in some of the locker room shots. But it's
That's
pretty
awesome.
cool. But so mostly on the rehab sports medicine side. But I kind of started in the industry as a trainer, as a personal trainer. So I did my first personal training cert while I was kind of recovering from my own ACL injury, which kind of obviously stimulated the whole or inspired the whole career trajectory. But I just became obsessed with movement, pain, treatment, mobility, all because of my own issues, to be honest with you. And then in going through that myself, kind of figured out, I guess, like my own little secret sauce for how we do this at the Movement Underground, which is my facility here in New York.
Where in New York are you?
I'm on Strong Island, if you're familiar with it.
Nice.
So
Nice.
about an hour east of the city.
Okay. So we have a lot of friends in Long Island. We've actually had a couple podcast guests recently from Long Island. So it's nice to know that people have options over there.
Yeah, we
outside.
got a strong little contingency of like really great rehab and strength and conditioning coaches out here. It's actually pretty cool.
Do you know Dr. Sean Pastuch?
I know. I met
Yeah.
Sean recently at an event, go figure, and his facility is about 20 minutes away. So I'd recently done his podcast. He's become a fast friend, which is awesome. Even though we tend to travel thousands of miles and then hang out, even though we're 20 minutes away from each other. But it's funny. I was joking because I went to Gabrielle Lyons' event, and I meet more people from my area at these events all over the country than I do like in my area, which I always think is kind of ironic and funny. But
Always how it works.
yeah,
Always how it works.
100%.
So I want to start with the topic I think you just started to allude to was this idea of movement preparation and injury prevention. So I think you have kind of like two sides of the coin. You have the people that are like, you don't need to do anything for mobility or stability or anything else. Just go in and do your strength training in a full range of motion, and that should prevent injury.
Right.
And then you have the opposite side of the coin, which is kind of when I was at Equinox, it started to get through this movement screen process that was so fucking elaborate to where people wouldn't even get off the floor for an hour, and it just bored them to tears at $175 an hour. So you had like that side of the coin. As we all know, it depends, and it's always probably somewhere in the middle. So where do you stand on movement preparation, injury prevention, just as a whole broad topic?
Yeah, like I mean, like kind of we were talking about before. It does depend, and because I come from like the rehab world, and that's really a lot of where my background. So I'm dealing with a lot of people in pain with injuries, maybe post-op, and I think in those scenarios, like the things that you choose to do from like a movement prep standpoint, kind of matter a little bit more than if you're neurologically, metabolically intact, healthy, young, fit, no comorbidities, meaning like you don't have other health issues that might compound your movement. Then I don't think it's so much of an issue. So like, I also work with athletes, right? So some of my athletes, are genetic studs. They just have really good mobility from like, that's one of the big buckets we got to understand is that there's a genetic predisposition towards how mobile somebody might be. And then there's the, the nurture side of that, which is how do you use your body on a regular habitual basis? I think the movement prep thing definitely comes in more for, let's just say, our adult client who is maybe sedentary in their lifestyle, their work is very sedentary. Again, it does matter more for that person, I think. I think doing a little bit of prep work, it's kind of that ounce of prevention is a pound of cure. But like we were talking off camera, it's like if you had 10 minutes to warm up, what's the biggest thing that's going to help you prevent injuries or have a better session? Tissue temperature, right? Getting your tissues warm, like actually warmed up, getting your heart rate actually up and sustaining that for 10 minutes to the point where you break a sweat is a really good indicator that your tissues are ready to go. And you'll less likely have, those aches, pains, strains, all those little kind of wonky things that tend to happen as you guys both probably know, no offense thrown, but I'm in the same bucket. As we get older, our body doesn't quite respond or feel the same way that it did. So for me, I blew my knee out in high school. That's how I got into, the whole sports medicine thing. And in the years after my injury, I really struggled a lot with my mobility, which led to other problems for me. So I do think it matters when it matters. And that's why I try to screen everybody, when we come in, especially if they do have injury issues or health problems, so that I'm at least aware of where their linchpins are, where the opportunities are for that individual. And that's where I'll program in some specificity in their warm-ups, their mobility work, to try to bring up that deficit and give them more movement options for the session, right? So I think, what it is, the pendulum really swings. And, back when you were talking about like the Equinox days, like the FMS and the SFMA got super popular. And then it became like this arms race to figure out what's wrong with people. Meanwhile, there really wasn't anything wrong with them. So we're just looking for stuff to find. And if you look for it, you're going to find it. Now, whether that's relevant is highly debatable, but again, it matters when it matters. And I think because I work in a rehab situation, a lot of my clients come to me with pain as part of the reason that they came. Those people tend to need a little bit more specificity in getting them into loading their body in a way that is creating favorable adaptations for them without shoving a square peg in a round hole. And that's where knowing somebody's biomechanics helps a lot. But if it was a general pop, healthy person, get their tissue temp up and you'll probably be okay. Did I lose?
Sorry, I was muted.
Oh, okay. I just
Thank
thought
you,
I'd make sure
Aram. So that would just be, for just getting on a bike, getting on an elliptical, getting on a treadmill, something just moving, getting the heart rate up, starting to perspire a little bit, something basic like that for something.
I really love getting even my adult clients, like my NARPs. You guys know what NARPs mean, right?
I don't.
A NARP is a
non-athletic
regular
something.
person.
Yeah.
Non-athletic regular person.
I've evolved into.
We're all NARPs now.
I've evolved into an ARP over the last year and a half.
I've been a NARP since I was 1.
He tried to identify as a non-NARP and instantly tore his Achilles.
Right.
So he's back. 10
So you mean it's not about just how you feel? Is that what you're telling me?
It's not about how you look either. You know what I mean?
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
This was not an athletic body. It looked like an athletic body, but it did not function like one. Let's be very clear.
His body is I'm a bouncer body. I don't know if I can do anything with this body, but it looks a way that people will act in line. That's I think, it's the best defense you could have is nobody stepping to you.
I think that's like the ends justifies the means in every conceivable way right there. I love it.
My physique, I have to learn how to fight.
Right. Yeah. Same.
People will just take advantage of it.
You're just very fuckwithable.
Yeah. I got to walk my chin up or a little bit, make sure the
Puff the chest up.
Shirts tucked in the sleeves, tattoos to try to intimidate. But at the end of the day, they know they can whoop my ass. But they don't know that I'm attacking the groin immediately.
Right.
I'm not fair fight. Why would somebody do that? Why would anybody get involved in that? NARP.
Awesome.
So NARP.
Right.
NARP.
I don't even know where I was going with that. I totally forgot because now I'm just being like, man, I'm a NARP now.
What you like with the warm up? We were talking about getting the
so I love using the same kind of dynamic movement warm ups like I do with my athletes. A skips, B skips, power skips. I love doing that with my adult clients, and they love it too. So sometimes I think it depends on what they like to do. Especially, I got my adults who are like, I love triathlons, I love running, I love playing pickup basketball. It's like, okay, well, maybe we want to get some more ground contact exposures in for them that are dynamic and variable. And again, they don't have to know all the science behind, why that's important for it to translate to the other things in their life that they do. Right. So again, I don't know if you call that's the definition of functional training, but giving people a little bit of the exposures in the weight room or at their exercise that are both entertaining, but also hopefully carry over to other areas of their life where it's useful.
For somebody who's they're noticing as they're getting older, like, man, mobility is not once what it was. And I'm talking all the joints, the shoulders, the hamstrings. What would you suggest for the person who does want to start to focus on that? A totally separate mobility routine, or just focusing on their warm up before their lift or after a lift? Where would you go with that?
A little bit of both. Generally what I do is I program for my clients what we call everydays. So this is like your movement snack. It's a little 10-minute mobility flow that maybe you do in the morning, maybe you do it midday at work, maybe you do it at night, maybe all of the above. These are, low intensity, like end range isometrics, joint circles, little intentional moments of movement practice that are, at least along the deficits that you currently are having. So I think that's one way to do is kind of like the erosion method, which is you chip away a little bit at a time over long swaths of time. And then the other thing I do is incorporate that into their pre-training preparation work. Because if, let's say somebody's got a hip internal rotation deficit, right? They don't have good hip mobility and they don't have a lot of access to flexion because of that. Maybe priming that prior to squatting or hinging or some other movement is just going to help them be more successful in the main lift. So I do think it really works well then. So especially for us, like we deliver our training in a semi-private format. So somebody might be coming in 2-3 days a week for training where they're getting coaching. And then we like to take elements of that and just trickle that into their program design for every day, even the days they're not with us. So it's a little bit of teaching a man to fish instead of just giving them a fish. But I do think there's room for a little bit of both. I do think though, if you're going to give people homework for their mobility, make it doable. 5 minutes, 2 or 3 things, because most people, when they get overwhelmed, like, oh my God, I don't have 15 minutes. They just don't do anything. And I'd rather people do a little bit of something consistently than a whole lot of something once. Right.
And then what is the science behind like the static stretching? Is it the muscle's not going to start to give in until like 30 seconds into a static stretch hold? I remember hearing something about that before, and I remember thinking, "Oh, that's new to me."
I've read long-lasting adaptations to static stretching don't start until 90 to 120 seconds.
Right. So you'd have to hold that position for that long.
So I'm going to answer your question with another question. Why do you think that's important?
Why is static stretching important?
Yeah.
Why is static stretching important in general?
Yeah.
Tensile. I'm going to answer it with tensile strength and tissue integrity, and also the fact that there is kind of a immediate feedback loop that people feel because they feel slightly better afterwards.
I love that. That's a great answer.
To me, I mean, my first thought would just be overall feeling better going through every day and potentially reducing injury just because you have more range of motion.
Okay. So as far as like injury prevention is concerned, static stretching may reduce your injury risk exposure by like 4% or something like that. It's like almost no effect size on actual injury risk reduction. In fact, strength is far more insulative of injury than a lot of like stretching would be. Now, this is kind of where I try to be very careful, like with my words. And when I teach this stuff is making sure that we're all on the same page with what the definitions are. Because flexibility to me is your passive range of motion versus like your mobility, which would be your active range of motion. And I tell every single one of my clients and athletes, you cannot use a flexibility solution to a mobility problem, right?
So delineate that and explain that further so people understand what passive versus active is.
So passive range would be passive range of motion or flexibility is how much I can move your body. Like if I laid you on a table and you just hang out and I start moving your body around, what is the end range upper limit of range of motion that's available to you, right? From a tissue or joint perspective. Mobility is your body's ability from a neuromuscular perspective to use that range of motion actively on your own with no external assistance. So if you feeling tight doesn't mean you are tight, right? Like you could work with a yogi who can bend themselves in half and like, oh, my hamstrings are tight. It's like, well, tight relative to what, right? And I think what ends up happening is we tend to view the body through this purely mechanical lens, that the tissue is the roadblock, when more times than not, somebody's nervous system is actually guarding that tissue by, and I call that juicy. That muscle, that hamstring is juicy. It's got some neurological current running through it. It's on some level because that's your brain using stiffness to protect you.
Yeah.
Right. So we tend to want to stretch past that because it feels tight and it makes sense at face value. But when you understand, like if we look at stretching through a neurological lens, like what does that do to the nervous system and the brain? Well, it downregulates that connection. It actually reduces the brain body connection, which can absolutely be useful for some people who have a lot of just resting mechanical tension that they can't seem to break past. So to Aram, your point, that low load, long duration stretching basically starts to bypass the muscle spindle fiber or the internal muscle mechanism for that protective tension so that you're actually getting some mechanical stress on tissue, right? But for most people, I tell them you can't use a flexibility solution to a mobility problem. Like you can't stretch your way to more active range of motion. And so for a lot of people, stretching for them is like scratching poison ivy. It feels great while they're doing it, but it's actually making their problem a little worse than better. And so I try to use things a little bit more active end range work. So your PNF stretching, or if you look at the FRC stuff, if you guys are familiar with that, the pails and rails, they're just end range isometric holds, which I think for the time spent have a little bit more bang for the buck. They have a little bit more translation towards a neuromuscular development, towards translating movement that might have otherwise been inaccessible for somebody to make it a little bit more accessible. And, I like to kind of frame this around the idea that, why do we have so much pain with movement? So it's a lot of us start to lack the variability as we get older because we quarantine our movement to very specific activities, or our lack of movement even to very specific activities. Our ability for variation starts to diminish. And then why do we get hurt when we play that pickup game of basketball? It's just because we haven't exposed ourselves to those positions, ranges, loads, forces in a really long time. And if you don't use it, you lose it, right? And so I think the antidote for a lot of like the chronic pain, chronic tightness, chronic like as we get older, like in our 40s and 50s, we're like wake up and like, why do I feel like my body is like slowly solidifying, is incorporate more movement variability into our day-to-day life, right? That's why I like things like cars. People at face value, it's fucking stupid, right? It's like, okay, you're doing a big ass joint circle, but what it is intentional movement. You've now intentionally decided to use all of that joint range of motion, all that tissue extensibility, therefore you're preserving it on some level. And I think if people had a little bit of a smaller dose of more movement variability within their whatever specificity they're trying to achieve, muscle building, athletic performance, power, strength, whatever they're trying to achieve, they'd be a lot less painful in the process.
Is there a degree of pain that somebody should still be able to train with without it being an alarm?
Absolutely. I mean, pain is, that's a deep conversation, right? And I think we're, as a society, kind of programmed to fear it. We're afraid of being in pain, therefore something's wrong. But it's really more of a protective mechanism that it's just our brain asking us to change our behavior. That's what it is. It's giving us a subconscious indication that we need to change something in our environment. So I think what I would reframe is like, hey, like training through sharp pain doesn't feel right. I feel unsafe. Yeah, not good, right? You want to get that checked out and assessed. Like you got a little tweak or like, man, you know, my knee's bugging me a little bit today. This is kind of where I try to provide guardrails for my clients and like frameworks for them to work with and around so that they understand it better, so they're not fearing it and having it be this thing that gets in the way of their progress. I think low levels of discomfort are normal and honestly part of the process. You know, pain is a unifying human factor and condition. It's like every single person on this planet is going to experience pain, and we're all going to experience it uniquely, which also makes it a really tricky problem to solve because it's super complicated. There's lots of factors, lots of variables. It's not just how you move, you know, stress, lifestyle, nutrition, you know, all the things that you guys talk about all the time are huge factors. Even what people believe, what they hear, what they know, what they think they know, play a huge role in that.
The like just like the mind-body connection, the divided mind by John Sarno, I think talks about that stuff. So you're a big believer in that, even just optimism mentally in getting out of pain, would you say is a major factor in getting out of that pain as you're going through a rehabilitation process?
Absolutely. You know, if you, the great Aldous Huxley once said, right? The person who knows their why can endure any how. So it's like if you like or on a deserted island and you knew that you had to survive 4 years or 5 years and then you'd get to see your family again, you would do anything it took and you would crawl through glass to make that happen. Well, maybe not, but you know what I mean? If you see the light at the end of the tunnel, it's a lot easier to keep going. And I think where a lot of people, where they fail or where they slip through the cracks in the system is they go to doctor and this specialist and this specialty and this specialty and this specialty. And they get sent to all these different people who all say, oh, this is your problem. And it's never that one thing. And then now they're just spinning their wheels and they start to feel doomed. And this is why chronic pain is the single most expensive thing in our healthcare system. Like chronic pain costs our healthcare system, I think in the last time I read a firm figure on this was a study they did in 2011, and it estimated in 2011, so this is a long time ago, that the cost of chronic pain in America alone is up to $650 billion per year. So it's a huge industry, right? There's lots of money behind this trying to solve this problem, but it's so complicated that there is no singular factor. Yeah. So it's not that I believe the mind-body connection is a real thing. It is a real thing. Yeah. It's just a matter of how much of those things play a role in this particular person's pain, right?
Yeah, I mean, some people would say they don't believe like past traumas can then manifest in physical pain. I mean, you have something like fibromyalgia. It's like they just came up with a name for this to make people feel better. Like, all right, you have pain all the time everywhere. It's fibromyalgia. We got to give this thing a name. And they have no root cause for it at all. And a lot of these people have a lot of history.
We got a lot of diagnoses in medicine that are like that, that are like, we can't really find a known structural source for this problem. So we give you fibromyalgia. But the diagnosis of fibromyalgia was invented by insurance companies. Yeah. Not by doctors. That's just so we can label it so that we can pay for it. That's what it is. Because the diagnostic code has to match the procedure code in order for your insurance company to put it through their computer algorithm and say, okay, that's worth paying for. Yeah. Or deny, which is what it does normally. You know,
what are the major culprit joints of the body that people will have chief complaints about? I mean, obviously, like I would say, lower back is probably the one that comes up the most often.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Maybe behind that would be knees, and then behind that would be shoulders. So, just run us through, like, you know, lower back.
Hips are the only thing left, so we've kind of covered all of them.
Yeah.
Wrist.
Wrist, yeah. So, like, lower back issues. I have twinges in my knee when I'm doing a squat or a lunge or whatever, and then I have some overhead pressing pain. So, kind of break down like lower back, knees, shoulders.
Fix Aram now.
Yeah, where do you go with people? Like if you had a phone conversation with one of my clients who I sent to you to say, hey, Mike's the expert on this stuff, talk to him, and you don't get to touch that person, you don't get to see that person, what are you telling them?
That's where I ask a lot of questions, and I ask a lot of open-ended questions, which sometimes frustrates people, but it's also one of the rabbit holes I've went down was, you know, communication skills and being able to build that trust and connection with people a little quicker. You know, especially like if you're going to coach somebody on something like health or pain, like that's an intimate problem to solve. And a lot of people won't reveal like big factors that are linked to that because they don't understand that there's a link there. So one of my favorite questions is, what else you got going on, even if you think it's completely unrelated, right? But if I say, oh, does your back hurt on a scale of 0 to 10, you're going to answer me within the parameters of that question. So like a lot of the standard screening tactics for like how we gather this information in healthcare kind of sucks, to be honest with you, because it lacks that ability for us to like get to know each other. So the first thing for you, Aram, is I'd want to know more about your life. And like, what stress factors do you have? Like, what's your day-to-day look like? What is your job? Like, even just knowing somebody's occupation can give me a really good indicator of which levers I maybe want to pull, right? So there's the biological levers, which is like your actual tissue, maybe your mobility, your biomechanics, maybe actual structural changes to your body that have occurred, surgeries. Then there's the psychological part, which is like, like, are you a police officer working in like the worst precinct in America? Or are you an accountant in an air-conditioned office all the time? Like, the context for your problems in life are going to be a lot different based on what you do a lot with your time, right? So even knowing that can help me start to understand maybe where I would want to lead the conversation or ask more questions. And then there's the social stuff, which is like, well, if you're telling me like bodybuilding is just your life and it's the one thing, it's the stress outlet that you have, but you got all these problems and you can't lift, and that's going to be a huge issue for your mental bandwidth and your mental health, right? So how do I find a way to get you back to doing the things that you like to do, at least on some level, which is, I think, part of where doctors fuck this up, which is like, oh, it hurts to do it, don't do that. It's like, well, that's easy, man. You don't need a degree to know that. It's like, well, what else can I do? And again, I think a lot of the problems with our healthcare system come down to the fact that you don't really spend a lot of time with the providers that we put highest on the pedestal. And so like, personal trainer, strength coach, a physical therapist, or an athletic trainer like myself, like we spend a lot of time with our clients, and like we're really the foot soldiers to be able to maybe help stem the tide of chronic pain, but we have to be aware of that all these things potentially are linked together. So with you, if it's a low back, it'd be like, well, what's the context around that low back pain? When does it flare up the worst for you? What makes it better? What do you feel like makes it better? And then just listen to what people have to say, because it's their body. They're going to know it better than me, so like, well, unless I can physically watch them and, do the whole thing. But then I'll watch people move, be like, and then I'll ask them, how does that feel? Or what's your experience with that movement? Does it hurt? Does it just feel restricted? Where? In what way? And I just try to get people to be as descriptive as possible, because you'll be surprised at the quality of information that even people have no clue that can give you if you give them an opportunity. And when I say, is your pain sharp, stinging, stabbing, dull, or tingling, it's like you're just going to say one of those 5 words. Right. You're not going to actually tell me how you feel. And I think part of that is just being able to listen to people and pull out the meaningful bits. But, from a biomechanics perspective, how well do you flex and extend your spine? Does all of that motion happen at one level or a couple of levels, or are you globally able to segment really well? If you can't segment and you have low back pain, let's work on that. There's no downside to actually improving how well your spine articulates as an independent joint, and then look at, okay, what's the context that this spine has to operate in, right? Like one of my favorite quotes is, I tell this almost every client, is when a flower doesn't grow, you don't fix the flower. You fix the soil. You fix the environment that the flower grows in, right? So if your lumbar spine is just absolutely wrecked all the time and you have really terrible hip mobility, but your hips don't bother you, that's a non-painful joint with a meaningful impairment, probably worth spending a little time watering the grass there, because it's improving the environment perhaps that low back operates in. And most people don't have to become a gymnast in their mobility to feel a whole lot better. Even marginal improvements to range of motion can be an absolute game changer for somebody.
Well, and I think so many people are shying away from certain movements, again, because they hear things like, oh, if your knees hurt squatting, then don't squat. Or if your lower back hurts, it's probably because you have a weak core. And I hate that blanket diagnostic verbiage that just gets used and thrown around and almost overused, to where it makes people self-diagnose and also be fearful. And then they have this very short-sighted narrative of like, well, I must have a weak core, so I have to just do a bunch of planks and crunches.
Right.
It's like, no, you don't understand how to articulate your ribs and your pelvis together when you're going into a hip flex position, and you have no idea how to breathe and brace properly at all, because nobody's ever taught you, nor have you ever been curious enough to even explore what the fuck that means.
Exactly. And so what ends up happening is we funnel patients in pain to a medical provider who's going to spend very little time with them and not get to know them at all. And that one diagnosis is going to now set the stage for the entire experience that they get in healthcare beyond that. And I think that's ass backwards. That is absolutely ridiculous. And part of the thing that I'm most proud of is because we get to know people on a more personal level in the gym and in our clinic, and we build these relationships, and we've built the relationships with the providers in our area who are really good at what they do. Now I'm actually doing what an athletic trainer does, which is I'm coordinating people at the right time, at the right process to see the person that they need for the specific issue that they have. But to your point, our industry lacks the generalists. And I really do believe athletic trainers and strength coaches can occupy that space where we become that switchboard operator of helping coordinate care, for people. But it's these little things that doctors say, especially physicians. And I don't mean to call physicians out because there's plenty of really good ones that don't do this, but words are easy. It's easy to say, oh, your core is weak, that's why your back hurts, and then go on to the next patient. What you don't realize is the cataclysm of events that you've just set off in this person's mind that gets them no closer to fixing the problem, because you've now defined the problem that isn't actually a problem.
Right.
That's a misinterpretation of correlational data from the late 60s.
And good luck trying to explain to somebody what a weak core actually is, or what the fuck their core even is. Like, we were always taught, I mean, not taught, but before we understood anything about the human body or ourselves, we thought the core was just a six-pack.
Yeah.
As opposed to basically nipples to fucking knees is what the core is.
I love that.
That's kind of what it is.
What's the thing that the women wear?
The corset.
The corset.
I was gonna say Brazilian. I'm like, it's not Brazilian. It's a corset. It's everything where a corset would be.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I tell people your core is more like a soda can, right? Yeah, this is the analogy I like to use. It's a soda can. It's a pressurized system. This can is now empty. I'm also hopelessly addicted to caffeine, if you guys have not already gotten that from my personality. But the can itself, the aluminum is very weak material. Like, I can crush it. I could tear this with my hands easy. But when it's sealed and it's full and it's pressurized, you can stand on it. Yeah. And it's so stable. The pressure inside the can supports the walls of the can. But the missing pieces that a lot of people don't realize are part of your core is your pelvic floor, which for women becomes more of the linchpin than men. We tend to have more anterior abdominal issues like hernias.
Yep.
Because we have a natural weakness in the anterior part of our core. And then your diaphragm makes the lid. And to your point, Aram, you nailed it, man. A lot of people just don't know how to brace well. They don't know how to breathe well. They breathe with their neck flexors and their freaking traps in their chest because they're always stressed out and anxious all the time. And then they bring that into the gym with them, and they're like, why do my necks and my T-spine and my shoulders not move? It's like, well, can you take a breath, please? God. Like, are you okay?
Your shoulders a little bit.
I just drop your
and you'll see that people are just so. But again, this is kind of, where we talk about bridges between like biomechanics and like these psychosocial factors, which a lot of people think are like these hippy dippy things. But it's like so breath is a subconscious, or really technically it's an unconscious movement that we can consciously take over whenever we want. And that's a really powerful thing, because we can use a conscious pathway to train an unconscious movement. And so for a lot of people, high stress jobs, lifestyles, world that we live in today are just like always kind of anxious and a little bit stressed. And now this manifests into their movement habits, where we're just breathing consistently into our neck and chest wall, and our ribs start to flare out. Now we have no ability to really like manage that lumbopelvic junction, or that rib cage pelvis, like you're saying. So it's like, I'll get people to focus on their breath, and all of a sudden now we can tone some stuff down and maybe give them an opportunity to move. Sometimes that is the catalyst for that individual client that unlocks something for them. And that's where like the PRI stuff has, isn't just foo-foo weird hippy dippy stuff. There's a time and a place for some of those interventions that could be really powerful for people, but it's not going to fix every problem. You can't just PRI everybody and like magically everybody gets better. And that's the problem with these like weird tribes in the health and fitness industry that pop up, that I'm always just like, what the hell are these people doing? So crazy.
it's easy to build these little sanctions and factions because they can monetize it,
True.
and they could also pronounce a problem that sounds universally true, right? Like you have a bad back because XYZ, which now 90 people will immediately resonate with, which means
Sure.
they're going to go run out and buy that program. When in reality, they just sit all day, they have weak glutes, they have tight hamstrings, and they don't do anything with their body.
Right.
Or when they do something with their body, they're working in the sagittal plane 99% of the time and don't, like, that was guilty as fucking charged. Like I worked in the sagittal plane for almost 2 decades with doing nothing else. And lo and behold, the second I stepped out onto a football field to play flag football for 5 minutes, I tore my Achilles.
Yeah, man.
And, you know, that taught me a lot of lessons. And now that I'm 41 years old and I don't give a shit about being the strongest or the biggest anymore, I want to be able to. Thank you.
I've been able to witness this growth over the last few years. It's exciting.
Validating.
That's easy for you and I, Jim, because we're not we're not big, but
I know.
That's all right. That's
I know.
fine.
We were stuck with natural self-esteem. We didn't have to.
Yeah, I don't,
and darishly good looks.
Yeah,
I don't have these things, fellas. So I have to build. I have to build an exterior shell to protect myself from your predatory ways.
Yeah, you're Iron Man, dude. You're real life Iron Man. No, I just didn't have the mental strength that you had to build that kind of muscle.
Man, it's tough.
My
it's
mental
really,
weakness is displayed through my physical weakness.
It's called trenbolone. It's very easy to access, and it works.
That's
really,
a new
really
one for you.
Yeah.
That
totally.
wasn't an old school thing for you. That was a newer thing for you.
So, like, when we're talking about things like hip immobility or shoulder immobility, I mean, a lot of it obviously stems from people just not doing stuff most of the time. Like, I stand at a standing desk. I'm very aware of my posture. I understand and think about the way my feet contact the floor. Your average person doesn't go through that checklist ever. They don't understand that they have a left hip hike or that they're standing in an anterior pelvic tilt. Like, they don't think about any of this stuff.
And that they're sitting with a wallet in their back pocket all the time.
Right, which is exact. Or when they're in their car, they have one hand on the steering wheel and one elbow dipped down.
Or their chair's broken like mine and is a little tilted to the right side. And I need to get a new one for this exact reason that you are saying right now.
But I think a lot of that, though, Mike, and maybe you can talk about this, I don't ever want to over-pathologize things and make people hyper-aware of stuff, because now they start to micromanage all this stuff. And that's where you get the I know my body folks. And then now they're going to spend an hour and a half on the fucking ground rolling around into baby patterns and rolling patterns when really they need to be fucking squatting with a dumbbell.
Right. I think, it's kind of like what you're talking about is people getting like majoring in the minors and then getting so hung up in the minutia of all these little details that they lose sight of the bigger picture of what they're actually trying to achieve. And so, and I think to your point, like even with the Achilles, sorry about that. That sucks. Those are really tough. That's a tough injury to overcome. That and like quad/patella tendon ruptures are probably the worst too, in terms of like timeline, pain, disability, and even just like longer term, restrictions that you end up developing just because, repairing tendons is messy work to begin with. But, to your point, right, you spent decades building a physique that looks a certain way that could produce a ton of force, but there's more variables, right, that I think, and I'm a nerd, so the details to me are exciting. And one of the things I think I've gotten better at over like the last 10 years, at least, is picking and choosing how much of that detail I share with people. Some of that is like, do they really need to know this? Or can I just kind of like stealthily sneak it in for them and give them what they need with what they want at the same time. And then I give them the pertinent information so they understand why they're doing it, so that it means it gets done, right? And gets monitored on some level. But to what you just described is the classic example of the SAID principle. How do you build a ton of tissue? Lots of load, time under tension, repetitive over years and years and years and years. And what ends up happening is, because you're moving heavy ass weight real slow, is your nervous system now has built that into your musculoskeletal system. That is now the software program that you run on your tissue. And all of a sudden now you go out there, I'm going to go play some basketball or pick up football, and you're putting rapid force through tissues that otherwise perform much better with a slow, controlled, range of motion, you tend to put a lot more stress through that tendon that it has adapted to handle, and then boom, right? So like, how do we get tendon adaptations? It's high load, long duration, or rapid ballistic loading. Those are the two ways. And most people don't do nearly enough of that. I have a good friend of mine who was a pro bodybuilder. He just recently retired, but in college, he played football, and the dude at 260 pounds had a 40-inch vertical. I mean, the guy was a freaking specimen. Just one of those like genetic freaks who was a hypercompensator when he lifted weights. So he just put on a tremendous amount of size very quickly. He was also, he also did all the basic stuff right. He really took care of his sleep. He ate very, very immaculately. And this is for a college kid, which is even more impressive.
Wow.
And then, he was training football. So, fast movements, explosive, dynamic, plyometric drills, all this kind of stuff. Then, 20 years of bodybuilding later, he's making an Instagram video of him dunking because he's like, I still got it. And what happens? Goes up to jump, lands, tears both quad tendons.
Ugh.
You know what I mean? It's like worst case scenario, like destination fucked. But it's not because he's not a strong guy. And this is the part to me that like it's really annoying on social media. Is like, again, just because somebody's big, that doesn't mean they know everything. It's like they've gotten big. That's great. That's awesome. And it doesn't take anything away from the hard work that it takes to get big. It's just a matter of like, well, what are you trying to do with your body? Is get big. Okay, great. That's fine. That's a great goal. But what else are you trying to do? Is that the only thing that matters? So again, everybody, listen, all of us dudes want to look good, have a lot of muscle, like have people think twice before trying to maybe pickpocket us. But at the same time, if you want to play sports, you got to continue to incorporate some of that more dynamic movement so you don't lose it. So the pendulum doesn't swing so far in one direction that it's unrecoverable the other way. But it's hard, man. Life is busy, right? And we only have so much time to do this stuff. So
Where do you stand on the I have genetic bad back or I have genetic bad knees? Like you hear a lot of that stuff. Or like, well, my dad had bad knees, so I have bad knees. I mean, I always chalk it up to like, no, you just don't move.
You move as little and eat as much as your dad did, and that's
I was gonna say, I was like, you didn't inherit bad back gene from your dad. You inherited his shitty lifestyle habits. That's what you did,
Right.
And then you're just perpetuating those same poor lifestyle habits onto yourself, which is now a choice. And I like to just call it what it is. And sometimes I think a little tough love with people and like calling them out on that is maybe warranted, again, depending on the person and, what your relationship is with them. I'm not afraid to like tell people hard truths if I think it's going to move the needle for them or at least change their perspective on how they look at this. But it's like, I think, and I even have a problem with that in broader healthcare where we say obesity is genetic and all these things, all these diseases are genetic. And it's like, listen, genetics is really important. So is epigenetics. And maybe one of the more compelling subject matters or topics currently is epigenetics, like how we pass our lived experience down to kids perhaps. But
I mean,
again,
if obesity was genetic, we wouldn't have obesity.
Well,
because it would have the non-obesity problem that we didn't have obesity as a problem 70 years ago. So if it was just genetic, we'd have the same stats.
Listen, 100,000 years ago, if you had a little extra body fat, that was called insurance.
Yeah.
Right? That's an insurance policy on maybe you don't find food for a week. Okay. You also had to chase your food through the desert and beat it to death with a rock. So that also helps you with, the thermodynamics issue. Again, it's habits, lifestyle,
correct,
right? Genetics, like they say, genetics loads the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. I think genetics has become a convenient, and this is my unpopular opinion, I hope you guys don't mind, but it has become a convenient cop-out for people to take the responsibility of their health and put it on some factor that they can't, some ominous factor that they don't control.
It's the same thing as the labeling too. Like that's just how we are. That's just how I am.
Exactly. It's and I should be accepted this way. It's like, and again, I'm not saying treat people poorly. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying like if we want to solve that problem, we have to agree that what is the actual problem, right? You know what I mean? Like there's lots of different ways to define the obesity issue. But again, you could take a powerlifting group of people who have a lot of muscle mass and a lot of body fat, and you can look at the comorbidities or the lifestyle or metabolic issues, and they aren't there. So it's not purely a fat problem. It's an under muscle problem. Most people just don't have enough muscle mass. And the more in-body scans I do and the more of these really deep evals I'm doing with people, now that I'm asking them more health questions and I have, the doctors that I can refer to help me with this stuff, I'm like, whoa, man, this is like way bigger issue than people realize, is how under conditioned and under muscled we are as a species now. And it's a sedentary lifestyle. It's everything is easy for people now. Yeah, even my athletes, it's like they just expect to get a scholarship. It's like, no, like you're talented, but there's some other kid just as talented out there working harder than you right now.
Yeah, but they played varsity.
Right, exactly. In Long Island, which means
they did travel.
Totally nothing.
They did travel team
right
through middle school. So I mean, I don't get it. Why aren't they getting scholarships? They did.
I think our job too is to tease out the problems and make people aware of them, but then also be able to empathetically and empower them with the solution, which isn't going to be something that they're going to want to hear 99% of the time. Because anytime I have somebody come to me with mobility or lack of mobility or pain issues, my number one question to them is, "What are you doing about it?" And almost 100% of the time, the answer is nothing.
Nothing.
I'm doing nothing. I'm walking into the gym after a 12-hour workday of sitting on my ass, and I'm doing the program you gave me. I said, cool. Why do you think you're prepared to do that program when all you do is sit? And then when you don't sit, you're on your back for another 8 hours.
You wrote it for him, Aram.
So
maybe you should be writing better programming, Aram.
Well, and I try to give people, dynamic warm-ups to do and this and that, but it's like, well, I only have X amount of time.
They
so
skip.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's the point.
If you're not in pain, then I don't give a fuck what you do.
Right.
Do whatever you want. I don't give a shit until you're in pain, which is now the first priority to solve before you start training. Like, I'll give you an example. I have a woman right now who has lateral epicondylitis. Very common, not life-threatening, but annoying as fuck. So what can't she do? She can't grip dumbbells and grip shit that's heavy. So what did I have her do? I had her put an ankle cuff on and attach it to a cable machine, and now she can row and she can do flies and do everything else because the joint that's impacted isn't getting impacted anymore. So she's training around pain, but it required, and by the way, this is a person who's a trainer.
Sure.
Like a coach on her own. And a little bit more on the inexperienced side, but still, our job is to be able to give them their quality of life back, but they also have to be willing to be a participant in that pursuit. Because I think a lot of times it's like, well, give me the answer, or I'm going to go to a chiropractor and have them reset my imbalanced hips. It's like, well, muscle pulls bone. And unless that bone is broken, you have to address the muscular problem first, which is either too tight or inactive. So when you're talking to people that are kind of regurgitating these things that they hear online, or they're coming at you and they're almost trying to tell you what to do, how do you approach that issue? Because I think a lot of coaches that might be listening are like, fuck, I'm dealing with the same issue.
Well, I do exactly what I just said before, which is I ask them why they think that's important. Why do you think that's important? Oh, because so-and-so said so. Okay. Why do you think they said that? Or why do you think that they're an authority on that subject?
Because they're jacked.
Well, or maybe that's it. But what I try to do is using questions, right, as a way to help them unpack and get to the answer on their own.
Yeah, so they realize, I don't know. I just did.
I don't know. Yeah. I'm just regurgitating. I heard it from somebody. Exactly. They say. I'm like, who the F is they?
It's Paul Carter.
Right. Right. But that's the thing, right? It's these things get perpetuated and they get ingrained in people's belief systems. And those belief systems become the limiting factor, not the pain issue. Yeah. Right? The pain issue is something you can work around. And I think a lot of people, they'll come to see me because they think I have some kind of manual therapy technique that's going to magically fix them. But when they come in and I do my assessment, and again, I'm very careful with the words and how I frame these things. Like, hey, none of this stuff is flaws. These are the opportunities before you. These are where I think you stand to make the most progress in the least amount of time. What do you think? Wow, that sounds awesome. Does this sound like it'll solve your problem? The problem that you come in with? Yeah, I really think so. Are you willing to do the work? Yes, I am. Are you really? Okay, here's the price.
Yeah.
Right. And so I really, and that's the really cool part about a cash pay, PT clinic / gym, is this idea that we can hybridize the model and give people that, hands-on care when they need it, if they need it. and then incorporate that into a training model. But the idea is like, I'm going to help you reframe this pain problem into solvable bits of action that you can do every day, and then teach you how to do that sustainably, and then put you in a fitness program, and then you don't need me anymore.
Yeah.
You
And
know,
that's the goal
right.
is that autonomy at some point. Now, you just mentioned manual therapy, and I think that's important because I think chiropractic work falls into that, deep tissue
Sure.
massage falls into
Yeah.
that. But now you have every Tom, Dick, and Harry now can get a fucking set of cups on Amazon and can slap them on themselves or on somebody else. Where do you stand with the efficacy of manual therapy, and what should people seek out if they're looking for reputable professionals in that field?
And what's the follow-up to it? I think sometimes people think it's just the manual therapy, but what does the manual therapy maybe allow them to do that they have to follow up on?
Right. So I say manual therapy opens the door. You know, movement is how you walk through it, right? And so it ultimately, you getting to the destination means you have to walk through the door. I can open it a million times for you. That doesn't mean the door stays open forever, right? So I think a lot of people look at the intervention as the fix, but the intervention is just a means to an end. And again, this is where I think in the landscape of like the evidence-based stuff, and why you'll see big influencers in the health and fitness space say like manual therapy is stupid, is because it alone doesn't fix any singular problem. Now, that doesn't mean it can't help solve the underlying contributing factors, right? Tissue glide, or how well your layers of tissue slide and glide on each other, is a mechanical construct that we can physically manipulate. Now, that's not the only thing that might impede somebody's movement. Just the fact that I can touch somebody. And like if you start to look at touch or manual therapy via a neurosensory lens, like instead of thinking about what I'm doing to tissue, it's like, well, how does the brain respond to that? Well, the same areas of our brain that govern motor control also govern sensation, because it's part of the same proprioception, or that feedback loop of sensation goes to the brain. The brain determines what all this stuff means and sends the motor output out, which is why people feel and move better after manual therapy. But it's also why it doesn't stick, right? You're just changing the brain's opinion of the tissue downstream for a short period of time. And that's what the clinical evidence has suggested for decades. Now, where I disagree with the whole thing is like, oh, well, the whole practice is stupid because it doesn't fix the problem. It's like, well, where are you complaining about doctors prescribing antidepressants? Because that doesn't solve anybody's mental health problems. It just changes their brain chemistry to deal with it in a different way. Or why don't we talk about statins not fixing the problem? Statins are the most prescribed drug on the planet. Cardiovascular disease in America has gotten worse since its invention, not better. So again, if we're going to argue that a temporary solution doesn't constitute a solution, then we don't really have any solutions in medicine currently.
No.
You know? So again, it's a means to an end. People are suffering. And for somebody to say, I'm just going to exercise them better, and you can't go wrong getting strong, which I also agree with. I think giving them something active that they can do is better than thinking about what they want to be able to do. It's like that gets them on the road back to those things. I think that's super important. So to answer your question, Jim, it's the treatment should be followed. The passive treatment should be followed by an active approach to movement. If you're not getting both of those things, then what you're in is a Ponzi scheme or a treatment mill, right? And they're just going to keep, don't move because I want you to hold that adjustment. I'm like, listen, if your bones slip out of place that easily, then every time you stepped off the curb, your shit would explode. Like our bodies are not made out of chalk. Like they're robust, strong organisms. And I think, again, that's why words matter. When I frame somebody's limitations as an opportunity instead of a flaw, it's the same problem. It's just the way you're looking at it, the lens that you look through. And if I can, that's to your point around like empowering them to say like, oh, this is a mountain I can climb. This isn't impossible. And now I'm not helping them climb. I'm the Sherpa. I'm guiding them up the mountain. I'm giving them the hand when they need it, right? So I think the knock on manual therapy is that when you go to a quack provider's like, I'm going to fix you with my hands, I'm going to change your tissues with my hands, that's BS. That's not how that works. But that doesn't mean we throw the baby out with the bathwater and that the practice isn't valid, because touch isn't drugs and it's not surgery. So as far as like downside, there's much less downside with me working on you and doing some active release treatment or some Graston or some instrument work or cupping, if it helps you feel better and move better, and then we're taking advantage of that opportunity. I think as long as those things are in place, then you're in a good spot. And I think most really well-intentioned modern PTs, chiros, and athletic trainers are in that camp, right? Where there's a middle ground here that we have to incorporate some kind of active approach. I think where you start to see the lack of integrity in the manual therapy world is where we start to see like, oh, I'm going to fix you with my hands. And like you need to come see me because I'm the solution to the problem. It's like, no, the process is the solution. It's just a matter of, can we use this tool to help them buy into that process and to help them suffer a little less on the road.
So
Which I do think is important.
if somebody's looking for that type of professional, obviously, unless they have a you or a me, like, and they have to kind of Google their way to a professional, what can they search for to get to the right? Because it's not just deep tissue massage,
Right?
because you might just get pet for an hour, but it's also not like bloodless surgery, which is what some people will do.
Right.
Like, what should people search for when they're looking for that type of work?
Gosh, man, it's super hard. I think you're asking the $1 million marketing question. If I had the answer to that, man, I'd probably be raking in a lot more cash than I do. But I think what I do, how I attack that is I market the terms that people know.
Okay.
I call it physical therapy or massage therapy, sports massage, because at face value, people are like, oh, I'm looking for that thing. And then once they come in, I get the opportunity to assess them and actually educate them on what the actual role of this is in the process. And then that's kind of how we're able to work with people and I think also be transparent and honest with them with what a lot of clients appreciate that. It's like, before you swipe the card, you don't need me to touch you to get better. It's a means to an end. It's going to help you get there. It's a turbo button. It's getting us there faster. The destination is the same, which is the pain-free, moving better, doing the things that you want to do, getting back to your life. That's ultimately the goal. The process is going to be us raising your capacity. But first, we're going to address the linchpins. What are the things in your movement that you suck at? Let's fix that. Let's address that. Because if we can open up a little bit of variability for you, it changes everything moving forward in that process. And then so what we're really doing is we're using these terms to get people through the door. And then we're actually helping them define the problem and what the solution actually is, which is movement variability, movement capacity, managing your lifestyle in a way that's sustainable and doable forever that you enjoy. So I'm not saying you got to eat like perfect, but eat like an adult, like take care of yourself, and then enjoy some gelato when you want to,
Right. Yeah. It's hard, man, because like there's so many options out there now. Like I've done acupuncture, I've done Graston ART, cupping, chiropractic work. And the only time I ever really got better was when I stayed on top of the homework stuff that I had to do on my own. Like if I don't couch stretch every day, if I don't pigeon stretch every day, if I don't do some of this type of work, I'm gonna feel those aches and pains, and I should, frankly, because I'm not doing anything about them, because those things will go back to their locked up state, because I'm usually not addressing the problem. But a lot of people are gonna want to try to avoid that stuff or use it as a Band-Aid prescription until they completely break down, and now they're out of the gym or out of any type of movement for 6 months to a year. And now they're fucked, because now they're going to put on weight, because they're going to be in a depressive state, because they're not doing what they want to do. Food starts to become out of control and a coping mechanism. And it's just this very rapid decline, which I don't ever want to see. So it's good to know that there's people out there like you. And if you're listening to this and you're in the tri-state area and you have any aches and pains, you have another option now.
Not the tri-state area, dude. I'm like an hour from them, but when you get in a car, it's 3 hours from them.
Where are you at, Jim?
It's incredibly.
Are you in Jersey?
I'm Jersey.
Fucking Jersey.
I went up to see Sean one time. Like, this is 3 hours. It took me an hour and a half to get to New York, and then it's another hour and a half just to get down the freaking street to Long Beach. Yep. Freaking jokes. And don't be making people think, if they're willing to invest in getting from the border down that long ass island to where he is. Unless you're close, then yeah.
Listen, but the Northeast in general, man. And the cool part is I'm not the only one. I'm fortunate, and I'm very grateful to have had the crazy career path that I've had to be able to help people the way I do now. Is really rewarding and fulfilling. My whole thing is like, the nuanced conversation around like what you just said, like all of those variables that you just said are real life reasons why people deprioritize their health, because it's easier to ignore it. Right. And so I think what ends up happening is their health becomes this giant ogre that they have to slay. It's the dragon, and they just don't know where to start. And so I think the biggest piece for any coach, if you're working with that person who's got lots of issues, it's like just find them an entry point where they can be successful, that you can challenge them and they can be successful. I have athletes that train in my facility that have full ride scholarships, going to go play D1 lacrosse, D1 basketball, stud athletes. And I have middle-aged to older women that are on a health journey of losing 150 pounds. You know what I mean? Where they could barely sit in a chair to start. It's like, but where can we find an entry point and have these people be successful? And so at least they have some modicum of progressing towards the goal. That's motivation. That's what motivation is. It's not, we don't get the satisfaction from actually achieving the damn thing. It's just getting closer to it. So if I can just find that entry point, it's like, hey, all of these variables into consideration, which are the levers that I can pull that I think are going to give this person the earliest win possible. And that's why I love manual therapy, because it's really allowed me to get people wins day one. It's like, I didn't know I could move or feel this good. It's like, now you know it's possible. Now you have to do the work to keep it. Now you have to earn it. I can't give it to you, right? One of my favorite things is your pain is not mine to take away. It's yours to give up. But you have to give up the lifestyle habits and the poor choices that you've been making that have led you to this point right now. And so everybody starts their journey at the Movement Underground. We call it underground because we're going to plant you where you need to be planted, and we're going to harvest that soil and put you in an optimal position for growth as a human being, right? And that might be biomechanics, that might be strength and conditioning, it might be working on somebody's nutrition or getting them to go get the damn blood work and actually face the reality of what they're dealing with is. You know, some people won't even go to the doctor because they just don't even want to know what the problem is. And those are hard people to help, right? So if I can inspire them to take that one step and have them understand that you're doing this for you and just be their cheerleader, like we get to do that. I think like if you're a trainer, be your client's biggest fan, be their cheerleader, because having somebody who believes that they can achieve it, you might be the only person in their life that actually believes in that they can actually get it done. And it's crazy to me how many people don't really have somebody in their corner who wants to see them win.
Yeah.
And we as coaches get to be that. That's who we get to be every day for every person, is the genuine person in their life who wants to see them win.
Yeah, themselves included sometimes, right? Like they've already counted themselves out of the race 1,000 different times over because they've lost hope so many different times. And it's debilitating to watch. But like you said, we end up being those foot soldiers on the front, on the ground level, and being able to actually help these people. And hopefully we're doing it with a shred of integrity and not fucking people over and just taking their money. But that's another
you guys are definitely doing it with integrity. You know what I mean? Like, you know, what you guys put together as far as like the events go and the podcast and, you know, giving people an opportunity to hear different perspectives. And there's more than one way to do this stuff. I'm not saying my way is the optimal way, the best way. It's just a way as an athlete who suffered a career-ending injury and suffered with chronic pain and depression for a decade after. This was the way that I found the tools fit together so that at least I feel really good about the thing I sell. Like, yeah, we're not the cheapest place, you know, like my gym memberships are expensive because the quality of the coaching is super high and we keep it small so that we can maintain that integrity. You know, I pay my therapists well, so therefore I have to charge enough to pay them what they're worth so that I can keep quality people. And it's not just a mill of entry level providers just doing the services, you know, and going through the motions. So it's a little bit challenging at times, but I'm really proud of the fact that we've been able to create at least a clinical model and a business model that's somewhat reconciled and that ultimately serve the end of let's just give people results. That's really ultimately all I care about.
And there's so much the same thing. I don't know if you're thinking about it, Aram, at all, but last week our conversation with Angela, who's also a Long Islander, who does psychedelic retreats.
Oh, cool.
For primarily first responders, people who are dealing with a lot of trauma and addiction and whatnot. but the conversation was so similar in terms of you can have a psychedelic experience that would be like the manual therapy. It opens the door, but there is this work that has to be done for anybody trying to change themselves physically, mentally, emotionally, whatever it is. It's the work that's done on the daily basis after that door's open. And back to one of the early statements that you said of you have to believe that you're going to get better. You have to believe. I mean, how much the power of our mind is wild.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm pumped to meet you, and I'll be in St. Louis in July.
Let's go.
I haven't booked everything yet, but I'm going to. I was supposed to go to the Music City Fitness Expo at the end of May, but that's not going to happen. So I will. I told Kevin the other day that I'm going to see everybody there. So
Cool.
I'll get a chance to see you flex that speaking muscle.
I will do my best, sir.
Don't worry, I'm a pretty easy critic. Once I've already gotten a chance to talk to somebody and I understand that they're not full of shit, it's very easy for me to put people on stage at that point.
Right.
So yeah, I'm excited to meet you, man. I appreciate you coming on, Jim. Let's ask this guy his final question.
That's perfect. Now with the siren going, we like to ask all of our guests the same question so that we can compare and judge you to all of our former guests, former 170 plus guests at this point. Are you ready for your judgmental question?
Sure.
Bye.